Hello? Cool. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Welcome back. We have a huge topic on this plenary session. The topic is about China's new openness and how is this new openness being perceived by people inside and outside of China. And I think this is such a big topic that we could talk for days. But instead of days that we have only about 60 minutes. And we have 6 speakers from Europe, China, Asia, and so on and so forth. So this is an excellent panel. Before we kick off, let me introduce all the speakers one by one. On my very far right-hand side is Mr. Zhang Xiaodong. Chairman Zhang Xiaodong has a huge business between China, Europe, and Asia. Welcome. And next to Chairman Zhang is Mr. Jedlicka, President of Liberland. Welcome. I understand you are from Czechoslovakia, right? Czech Republic.
Originally born in Czechoslovakia.
I've never been to Prague. You have to tell me a lot about Czech. Thank you. And next to Mr. Jedlicka is Professor Roger King of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. As a matter of fact, Roger and I are really good long-time friends, old-time friends. And apart from his current role as a professor, he has a tremendous record, a successful businessman, entrepreneur, mentor, and so on and so forth in the Hong Kong business circle. Welcome, Roger. On my left-hand side is Mr. Pat Cox, the former President of the European Parliament. Your Excellency, good afternoon. Thank you. And next to Mr. Cox is my good friend, Mr. Anson, Chairman of the Bonds Group of Companies from Hong Kong SAR. Now, Anson Chan has exactly the same name of our former Chief Executive, but that is a lady, and he is a man. Welcome back. And next to Alan is Mr. Feng Jiacheng. Mr. Feng Jiacheng is from Guangdong, the Guangdong Hunational Investment Industrial Company from Guangzhou. 欢迎，谢谢. Good. Now let's get started on this topic. China's new openness. I don't know how to define this as a matter of fact, so you got me. But if I might just start by outlining some of the key points relevant to the so-called China's opening up or openness in the last maybe 20 years. The first thing that comes to my mind is China's accession into the World Trade Organization in about 2000 or 2001. And that's the first most important so-called opening up of China's market by joining the WTO. And then within China, within the government, we have established several major national objectives or strategies under this framework of opening up. The first one is the so-called development of the moderate prosperity China. That was developed something in 2003 to 5. And then the next most important national strategy relevant to the opening up of China is obviously in 2013 by President Xi Jinping, which is the so-called Belt and Road Initiative, in Indonesia. The rest is history, right? And lately, as of this year, actually as of last year, again, the Chinese government has established another major national objective, which is called the so-called Made in China 2025. Why do I mention all this? Because these are all important relevance to the concepts of opening up a big economy like China. Now, with that as a background, I would like to ask our distinguished panelists to share their insights on the topic. The first I would like to ask is, Your Excellency, Mr. Cox, you are from the European Parliament perspective. How do you perceive, or how do you accept China's opening up in the last 10, 20 years? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? Mr. Cox, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to join you today. I should point out today I speak for myself and for no institution. I no longer have a mandate in the European Parliament. I think on the opening up, it has been one of the most dramatic and accelerated examples in human history of taking very, very large numbers of people out of poverty and towards prosperity. And I think in this broad way, something to be celebrated. The second element, I would say, is that the shift towards the made in China and the emphasis on high tech and battery technologies and so on is in some respects a natural shift that is due. China now, like many economies in the past, faces the challenge of avoiding a so-called middle income trap, where you arrive at a point where there's a ceiling and you don't grow some more. So the impressive thing about China today is the intense level of research and development investment, which now rivals the scale in GDP terms of developed countries' R&D investment strategies. A third element, with the emphasis towards more consumption and looking at people and their spending, is a necessity in China, because the level of investment-led growth with a relative slowing down of growth is not sustainable. So China needs to find a consumption pattern to sustain China's own growth, and that inevitably requires a gear shift to do with policy. Let me say on the EU-China relationship, there was a summit meeting in July of this year, the 20th EU-China summit in Beijing. I'm not going to go into detail, words that both sides emphasize they share in common. A belief in multilateralism, yes. A belief in a rules-based international order based on the United Nations, yes. Respect for the UN Charter on territorial integrity and borders of states, yes. Middle East, a two-state solution, yes. Nuclear non-proliferation and the Iran deal, same view. G20 to work together on the steel overcapacity question in global terms, and a willingness by Europe to work some more on the connectivity question on the Belt and Road Initiative, and of course a strong willingness to work together on climate change through clean energy, circular economy and blue ocean initiatives. So these show a high level of overlap. If we've time later, I'll come back on some of the issues that I think need a bit more work to be done. And I think in particular on the Belt and Road Initiative, which is very welcome, I think we need to ensure that in its European manifestation, it can follow the rules of openness, transparency and open public procurement, which are hallmarks of the European single market and have not necessarily to date been hallmarks of the BRI process in administrative and financing and construction terms. But let me stop there and thank you very much for your invitation.
Your Excellency, you have made such a very rosy remarks about the future cooperation or possibilities between China and EU. My question, follow-up question for you is, how would you advise our entrepreneurs, our friends from China and also from Europe, what to do, or what are the key opportunities for them to tackle under this openness element? Thank you.
Well, I think under the openness element, and particularly I think of the Belt and Road Initiative, and then look at Ukraine's development needs as an example. I think when you look at that, there are some really good examples, and frankly, there are some troubling examples. So I think you need to study what could work for you as you would engage in the process. Let me give a really good example. In 2010, Costco from China bought the port of Piraeus in Greece, in Athens. And at the time, that port was the 93rd size container port in the world. With their investment, that has grown to the 38th size in the world, and they plan to make it the biggest port for container traffic in the Mediterranean, and I think they have the skill set and the finance to do it. There is an example that would pass the A-grade test of win-win. A completely different example would be what happened in Sri Lanka with a major port development with a lot of indebtedness, which ended up on a 99-year lease with China because the Sri Lankans couldn't pay the bill. Ukraine doesn't need to do that and does need to do Piraeus. So I would say in that sense, these things need to be studied in great detail, not with naivety, but with a determination that something which is win-win can emerge, and there are win-win possibilities, but you need to study what's there in order to understand what both sides can achieve together.
Very good, very good. The keywords are win-win. Thank you. When we have more time, we'll come back. Thank you, sir. Our next speaker, Mr. Anson Chan. Anson, you have a company, Hong Kong based, but you live in London, or you travel around the world, 75% of your time in the sky. You are a truly global citizen. The question, the relevance is, Hong Kong is at the heart of the so-called Greater Pearl River Delta concept, right? And how do you perceive this from the Hong Kong SAR private sector's perspective in relevance to China's opening up? Anson.
Thank you, Alex. Much like you, I do travel the world, and as a result, I'm sort of a citizen of the world. I have friends all over the place. Now, when you ask about the new openness of China, we have to go back to definition. China, by definition, started opening 40 years ago under Deng Xiaoping with the reform and opening of China. So, what do we mean by the new opening of China in this decade? I would say that the big distinction now is that China has successfully transitioned from a very low economic base to one of the more affluent nations now in the world. And not only is China ready and able to invest in other countries, China is also gradually reducing a lot of barriers to foreigners investing in China itself. So it's a two-way street. I think Pat here, Mr. Cox, pointed out how China invested in a Greek port and made it very prosperous. That's one example. Now, what are some other examples of how China can help developing emerging economies around the world? I gave it as an example the textiles and garments industry in the 1970s. America at the time was very concerned about how too much concentration of garment and textiles factories were based in Hong Kong, and that they decided to set import quotas to restrict the amount of garments and textiles that could enter America from Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong entrepreneurs traditionally have been very adept at changing regulations and changing conditions of the market. So what people did over the next few years was they then diversified away from just having factories in Hong Kong. They built factories in places like Nigeria, South Africa, Mauritius, Indonesia, Thailand, and these are all Hong Kong funded and managed factories that benefit local economies in a wide-ranging number of countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America. And why do I bring up that example, Alex, you may ask? It is because, as everybody knows, China is now faced with something very familiar to everybody here in the Ukraine. Ukraine has an unwanted war on its border with Russia. China may not be in a shooting war against America, but unfortunately we've been dragged into a trade war. with Donald Trump and America. And so with that, and I do not see an easy resolution to this conflict between America and China, because it is not just about tariffs, it's not just about trade balances and deficits. The way the American side is talking, the American negotiators are wanting to pressure China into making fundamental concessions on its industrial policy and its policy of state-led capitalism. Well, I do not think that China would likely give in anytime soon, so this trade war is likely to become more intense before it subsides. That will mean that entrepreneurs in China now, who have factories in China that export to America, may have to move these operations to other countries. And the Ukraine would be an ideal location because it has a good base of industrial workers and the tradition of having industry built up around from the time of the Soviet era. So I would say to all our friends here in the Ukraine, this is the best time for you to be attracting Chinese industrialists to move their factories from China to here, in part to escape the negative consequences of the coming US-China trade war. And that would be my take, Alex, based on
Anson, very good points. My suggestion this morning at one of the sessions, I was suggesting to the people that by removing the visa requirement of Chinese tourists coming to Ukraine, the number of incoming Chinese tourists would certainly double next year. That's my humble suggestion. So with that, I hope the both countries can open up, bilaterally, removing the visa. Now let's move to Europe again. Rich, can you share with us your perspective on this topic about Chinese openness? How do you perceive this, and what are the opportunities? What are the challenges by a business company or by businessmen like yourself? Thank you.
Well, I will talk more about Liberland businesses. I'm myself involved in the state building and nation building of Liberland, and maybe not everybody of you is familiar with what Liberland is, but it's a new country. It's also a new nation that was formed 3.5 years ago in Europe. Right now we are more than 500,000 people, which is very small compared to China, but there are some interesting statistics. I think nobody disputes the fact that Chinese are #1 in terms of Bitcoin mining, but you should probably also know that Liberlanders are #2. So in some of the aspects, China is being multiple times bigger nation than Liberlanders, but we are still able to keep track on some of these modern trends, which of course are cryptocurrencies. Liberland was built on really endorsing freedom, on building a state that would work for its citizen, a state where you pay taxes, you become a shareholder of the country that you're living in. We would like to bring in some of the forward-looking principles and combine it with the latest blockchain technologies. And what we see on the other side from China, of course, is the fact that there was a push on cryptocurrencies and in blockchain industry at some point, and that I think brought a lot of Chinese businesses outside of China, right? But there was a return to some policy which then attracted it back, but that actually left a couple of exchanges to be incorporated in Liberland after this policy change. And there is another very interesting aspect. There is a great interest, of course, in buying Bitcoin in China because of all the monetary restrictions. And I think that that's one of the, let's say, problems with the openness of the economy, that it's still quite hard in many aspects to properly function in terms of monetary exchange. And a great interest, again, in buying Bitcoin, where Liberland has helped to be kind of a middleman in these deals.
Do you think, in other words, that it's difficult for you guys to do business in China?
Well, not really. It's actually bringing us opportunity. You know, the kind of, and of course, Liberland itself was inspired by Hong Kong, by a great example. And I think, of course, China, it might not be saying out loud, but of course the whole Chinese miracle was kind of inspired by the success of Hong Kong, and I think nobody can doubt that. And it's great that China has gone this way to free markets, to more economic freedom. And I'm very excited about it. But of course, whenever the regulators come in, they bring in a great opportunities, but outside of China. And that's what I wanted to point out.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much. And next to Rick is Chairman Zhang. 那个张主席，你跟我们
Would you like to share your perspectives on new openness in China? What is your perspective in terms of air freight, sea freight? Thank you. I still remember that in 2007 I first attended Horasis. That was my first time. It was in Frankfurt. And over the last few years, the topic and the themes were centering around the globalization. But over the last 2 years, these kind of topics are not more popular anymore. It is a very interesting sarcasm. After years of development and reform and opening up, Chinese enterprises, Chinese government, and the Chinese people are now going globally. We embrace globalization. So in terms of the process of globalization, we have made a lot of achievement and progress have been seen by the global people. Over the last 10 years, actually, we are promoting the exchanges between China and the EU. I will take my hometown as an example. I'm based in Fujian. This is a province in China, and we embrace globalization. We are a part of the logistics. We are from my hometown and to Belgium and to France, to Netherlands. I also go globally. I promote my company in the European market. We hope that we can reach European market and embrace globalization. And over the last year, we all know that there are many changes in the political landscape, economic landscape. Changes happened and undergoing. But I still believe that Chinese government and the Chinese people, Chinese entrepreneurs, Chinese businesses are still insisting in the globalization. So for the last few days, we have seen that Chinese government published and formulated several policies which is in intention to support the globalization.
To solve some problem in economy, so in the future, how we adjust, carry out or continue with the reform and opening up, how to adjust our development in the future, how to make improvements in the future. So we also put forward some concept that is a new strategy that is to establish the new rural area, new village. Next week, Fujian provincial governor will visit some European countries. I'm in charge of arranging the trips for him. He's gonna visit Europe to visit some villages in Europe, because in Europe these villages have gone through some rapid development. They have achieved some great success. So nowadays we are rebalancing our development of the villages, how to re-innovate our villages. This is the issue we are concerned about these days. Our the planet is a shared place by all the mankind. So our future policy will be centered on this. We'll start from people-centeredness. How we're going to benefit our people will be our focus in the future. I would want to ask you another question. You are traveling around the world to see different businessmen and also officials from different world, different countries. From your experiences, could you share some of your perspective? How they perceive China's openness? So, do you think most of them are thinking that China is become more open, or you think that there are more ways for us to go. For me, that China, the people from other countries think that China is open enough. For example, the freedom of people, you would say more people are traveling around, people are exchanging with different people from the world. The media coverage has also cover a lot regarding the people. I don't think there's any limitation regarding the travel and the freedom of travel. But we are still confronted with some issues. For example, we just experienced a short time of reform. We are coming from different backgrounds of culture. We have different understanding of different countries. We have lived under different political systems. So it will take some time for them to know us, for us to recognize our system. For example, if you want to go to the foreign market, we would stand in other people's shoe, in the shoe of others. So for me, communication is very good. So now let's give the floor to Guangdong province. Mr. President Feng, Chairman Feng, you are the exchange center of Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau Exchange Great Bay. So could you share with us some of your perspective on the China's new openness? So where do you think we can start to promote further development of China? Thank you very much, Mr. Feng. For me, that China has proposed the Belt and Road Initiative. It is well received not only in China, also some areas, different provinces in China. It also benefited the world. It provided a lot of opportunities for the world. This Hong Kong, Guangdong, Macau, Great Bay has no exception, because you know that the culture and the economic development and also other aspects are leading the country. So during this promotion of the Belt and Road Initiative, this area must definitely benefit from this. The Belt and Road Initiative also benefits the world. And which kind of benefits it had provided? I think we could think through the following points. First of all, it promotes the trade facilitation between the countries. Second, it also increased the investment, decrease some cost of products. For example, we have already decreased the tariff. We also relaxed the market access. So by this way, you could say that the evaluation of our investment. Third, it optimized the investment environment of different countries. It also promotes the investment results and reduce the trade friction globally. The inward and out investment is quite competitive. Some small countries has lower costs than that in China. They have provide better incentives. They have good concept or ideas in creating a fair, a sound, a fair playing field for the development. China is working very hard to march toward this goal, and China already took a lot of actions. Under the Belt and Road Initiative, you could say all the initiative and work that China has done. Another way, it is the innovation and also cooperation with the other countries. We could adopt different ways to achieve win-win result. it could generate benefits for different countries and different regions. We could also reinforce the policy coordination with other countries. During this development, we could adopt a more flexible way to promote the cooperation. It will benefit all. Another point is that trade and investment facilitation has seen great improvement. Compared to the freedom and facilitation, the Belt and Road Initiative has seen more companies are going global, and there are a lot of more companies desired coming to China. So this brings a lot of trade facilitation. Starting from this point, this initiative will benefit the world. Another aspect is that China now works very hard, improves the capability in innovation and R&D, and a lot of opportunities are provided. China government values the technology innovation and also the property right protection. A lot of laws have been set to protect these issues. To sum up, in terms of technology innovation and investment and also finance, a lot of opportunities are provided. Europe and Ukraine and other countries share something common with China. You could learn from this, and you could also join the Belt and Road Initiative to get more cooperation with China. Thanks to Mr. Feng.
Roger King, I call you Professor. Roger, you were before with a major global economies, one of them, and then now in this Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Why don't you share with us your take on the topic from the angle of Hong Kong? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's an honor to be here. In terms of the definition of openness, I kind of agree with Anson's concept itself. China has been very, very open, especially for us living in Hong Kong. We never had the feeling that China is not open to us. And you have to understand, the so-called middle class in China for a long, long time they could not afford to buy products from outside of China itself. So if the definition is openness, ability to sell products into China, then simply because there's lack of funding by the populace, this is one of the issues itself. I think also, for some of you, maybe too young in this room, I pride myself on being perhaps one of the oldest in this room here. If you think about the 1950s, Japanese went through a very, very similar period. Trying to sell products into Japan was very, very, very difficult. And, I think there's a lot of parallelism between early days of China since communists and early days of, let's say, after World War II, Japan itself. So, you can even say today, is Japan open? Some people will question whether Japan is really, really open today. And, let me, as Alex mentioned, I was involved in a shipping company itself. This is a company called Orient Overseas Container Line. It's actually our family business. And Pat mentioned that Costco, this is also very, very interesting. We actually recently sold our company to Costco. And so ours is a listed company. We didn't have any problems, but still it required various jurisdictions' approval. And so China didn't have any trouble approving us. EU didn't have any trouble approving us. Then it came to the United States. The United States government said, oh, by the way, OOCL has a large container terminal in Long Beach. And because of that, they threaten not to approve the transaction itself. And so finally, we, together with Costco, had to agree with the US government to eventually sell the terminal itself, which ultimately would be done. We are given an 8-month period of time. Actually, Costco bought our company. The transaction was just done less than a month ago. So I'm very, very relieved. But we have 8 months to sell the terminal. From our side, we sold everything, so it's really up to Costco. And the reason given by the US government was that our terminal, Long Beach terminal, is a very, very high-tech terminal itself. They did not, the American government did not want the so-called technology fall into the hands of Chinese. So this again, you talk about openness and everything else. By the way, we didn't want to create too much trouble. The technology was actually from Europe, and it's not an American technology itself. We brought the European technology into Long Beach, and it's a fully automated container terminal itself. So this is something just share a little bit. But I thought, you look at about openness and looking forward. There's a huge, huge middle class coming up in China itself. And this is where opportunities are, both for Chinese firms as well as non-Chinese firms. And I believe China is very, very open to have foreign firms come into China to sell the products. Now they can afford it. More importantly, Chinese are looking for technology, not so much technology in the sense the Americans think about technology. They're looking for the concept of branding. If you think about it, China for many, many years didn't have product brands. It's only in recent years you have Alibabas of this world and Huawei's of this world. So they welcome joint ventures with companies that have brands. And I'll give you one more example, if I may. Recently, a German company by the name Seamatic, they're very, very big into kitchen designs. So they joint ventured with a Chinese firm in China by the name of Anson. And so, of course, the Germans want to sell their products into China. And of course, the Chinese would like to have opportunity to understand the operation itself. And guess what? Ultimately, the Chinese company took control, bought 75%. It's a family-owned business, the German family, and they were willing to sell 75% of the business to the Chinese. But the management and everything else stay with the German firm, and it's a German family-owned business, and the family continues to operate that. That's a very, very interesting concept of opening up and so forth. Another example, I just cite an example. I saw a commercial. It showed a shirt that was made, and inside the label it says "Made in Italy." Chinese are very, very fond of Italian goods, right? So it's made in Italy. That underneath it, it says "Designed in China." So
Really?
So it's moving in that direction.
No offense to those Italian brands.
So I think China is open, always been open, and it's just finding the right opportunity to move in. And there's this huge middle class that's developing, and there are many, many products that can be sold there.
Very good, Roger. I agree 100%. I think the issue of whether China is opening up in love is a non-issue. The real question that we should look at or look into is how to tap to this gigantic potential of the market. Like Anson and Pak, you said about, and Roger, you talk about the domestic consumption market is huge. I cannot associate or think of any other market that has the potential as the opening up of this Chinese consumption market. Now, we have about 10 minutes left. I would like to open up the floor for questions or comments, very brief. And also, if any of the panelists would like to comment on others' points, please feel free to do so. Pak, do you have any further comments before we open up?
I've one very brief comment. I underline again, I have no mandate to speak for any institution here. I think there's a great strength in the Belt and Road Initiative. But everything, like a coin, has two sides.
Right.
And to do with potential weakness, some issues have been pointed out by the International Monetary Fund, and there are some issues, if this is to grow and develop inside European Union, or now with an associated state like Ukraine, where we need to ensure that all the rules are not only Sino-centric on the territory of neighbours. And so we need to do a bit of work there to take a strong product and make it stronger by being willing to recognise that here or there may be one or two structural issues that need to be addressed on a mutually respectful bilateral EU-Chinese basis.
Very good, thank you. Anyone else? Any further comments? No? Please, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention one thing about the openness. The other ban that was recently introduced in China was the ban on ICOs. And I'm a little bit out in a kind of different industry than the rest of you, and that you're in a traditional one. We in Liberland went the other way. We endorsed ICOs. We also built a platform for the state kind of decentralization of the state itself, but also of the companies. So now, when you come to Liberland, you can create your company on blockchain, and we endorse that. And the whole system of governance is run on blockchain. And I think it's a pity that China, went against the trend, in some sense, discouraged the industry. And now it will have a little bit, well, it's probably not, but it just slowed itself down a little bit. But I think that is also coming. We will see that China, maybe in 2 or 3 years, will go the way that companies in China will also be incorporated in blockchain. It will be a recognized way of incorporating business.
Thank you, very good. Any questions from the floor or comments? Please, go ahead. Very briefly, thank you.
Thank you. George Iliev, based in London. My question is on One Belt, One Road. Would you think that the projects under One Belt, One Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, would be welcomed more by other countries if China declares these also as projects for financial return, because they're in emerging markets where there is growth? So if China, rather than positioning these currently as more political projects, makes them more of a financial investment that pays higher return than US Treasuries, would that be welcomed by other countries?
Thank you. Would anyone like to take that? Anson?
Let me take that first, because I think the question itself is slightly flawed, George, I'm afraid. The Belt and Road Initiative is not meant to be just for geopolitics. Sure, there's an element of China extending a hand of friendship to countries in Africa, in Central Asia, that generally lack international funding. But most of these projects are supposed to pay for themselves, and a number of these have sovereign government guarantees. So I think Pat here mentioned one in Sri Lanka where, that was, unfortunately, the port did not do well, and China ended up with a 99-year lease. But that was not the intent of China. China never wanted to get 99-year leases. Only the British try that, and I say to my colleague Paul Cummings, should have asked for a 999-year lease, not just 99 years, right? So, fact is, really, China is not in it to try to occupy other people's territory or airspace. It's really for commerce and the facilitation of infrastructure so that countries that are landlocked, countries like Africa, long neglected, can get public infrastructure built and their products shipped to the rest of the world, not just to China, efficiently.
Good, Anson. Pat?
Very quick observation. The level of indebtedness in China overall has grown dramatically from about 170% of GDP before the West financial crisis to almost 300% today. And there's certainly some part of Chinese investment at home which can also fit into the question you asked about the bottom line and the rate of return. As regards the point you make, without making the political point, as someone doing something for strategic political reasons, Christine Lagarde of the International Monetary Fund was in Beijing on the way to the annual IMF meeting. And she pointed out to a study of IMF that Pakistan, Djibouti, Maldives, Laos, Mongolia, Montenegro, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan today have unsustainable debt levels, and trying to encourage China on the Belt and Road Initiative not to dip into places that already have unsustainable debt. And so, yes, there are some questions. And without putting a political motivation, I think the economic rationale of investments that should deliver visible rates of return is good for Chinese citizens, and it is good for people globally. Because if we don't do that, we have bum assets on bank balance sheets, and we risk, as we know, to end up with a financial crisis, and that's in no one's interest.
Thank you, Peg. In addition to what Peg commented, ever since the announcement of this Belt and Road Initiative, China actually has established several major international multilateral arrangements, such as the so-called AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, of which many of the European countries are early members of AIIB. And also, later on, we have this so-called the BRICS Bank, or the so-called the New Development Bank. And then we have the Silk Road Fund, and so on and so forth. With all these establishments, China is trying to open up the opportunities along this Belt and Road region to participating countries and member countries. So we have about 5 minutes left. Any further comments or questions? Please.
My name is Vladimir Golovko. I'm from National Academy of Science of Ukraine. My question to Mr. Fox. What do you think? Are there any perspective for Ukraine to join to negotiation format EU-China 16+1 as, for example, observer? What Ukraine has to do for this? Thank you.
Well, the 16+1 is a bilateral initiative between Beijing and the 16. It's not a multilateral initiative between the EU and Beijing. And so this was one of the points I was trying to make diplomatically earlier, that if you have EU-China summits that talk respectively about multilateralism and bilateralism together, I think it's useful when you want to do work of this sort on the territory of another space that there should be more dialogue. So the inclusion or exclusion of Ukraine is not an issue that has come on the EU's agenda, precisely because this initiative is an initiative which so far has not appeared to include any dialogue with the EU as an institution. And I think as regards Ukraine, it's important to remember when we come to geopolitics that there are many levels of relationships. And perhaps the strongest bilateral relationship of the Xi Jinping era in China has been the 26 times that Xi Jinping has met with Vladimir Putin. I don't want to go into all of that, except to say these issues are not irrelevant to a country whose territorial integrity has been disrespected by its near neighbor.
Very good point. Any further comments? Zhang Jusi. 有吗 Jade, go ahead.
I would just like to comment to the previous comment. The Balkan Initiative is of course great for us as a startup country because the amount of investments into Serbia, for example, is broad, and we are profiting from that indirectly. And then the Liberland is on Danube River, and we are also closely working with the free trade zones in Serbia that will enormously profit from all these investments that are happening, and I hope that it will expand the trade enormously in near future. So I applaud this and welcome it.
Thank you. Zhang总，你有没有
So, Mr. Zhang, do you have anything to add up? Nothing well? All right, Roger.
I'm trying to wrap this up. I think this topic is a huge topic, as I said in the beginning. I'm so glad that almost all of the panelists share the optimism that China actually is opening up further and further, which is a no-brainer again. I think the issue ahead is how to tap on these opportunities instead of campaigning this and that. And my suggestion is for all the people, all the friends here, from Ukraine, from Europe, or even from Russia, from China, the key word here is understanding. And also another key word that I mentioned this morning is the lack of understanding means misunderstanding. Why do people perceive China as being not open enough? Because they don't have the correct understanding. So you cannot blame them, you cannot blame China. What I'm suggesting here, everyone, is to increase the communication, increase the flow of people, increase the flow of capital, and thereby increase the flow of opportunities. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's hope for a further opening of the Chinese market will only benefit not only China, but the world at large. Please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause. Thank you very much. 谢谢. And we suggest that we have a good photo here. 我们在这里拍张照啊。Good. Come back.